Guys, good evening. Could you able to hear my voice? Okay, guys, the session will start in another 10 to 15 minutes. Some network connection in the mentors area. So you'll be starting it at 4:30 sharply. Okay, sorry for the inconvenience. So we'll be starting at 4:30. Kindly wait over the session. Thank you, guys.
Sir, I have made you as a host, sir.
Yeah, Oma. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sir. Continue the session. Thank you.
Hi, guys. Uh, Good evening. Let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Okay. Thanks for confirming. Yeah. Sorry about that. So my network is very bad here, and that's why it was late. Okay. So before starting with today's topic, yesterday I gave you a task regarding implementing the counter app. So this is what the task that I gave. So did anyone tried it? Can anyone demo now? Is it possible? At least 2 members. So have you tried this? Okay, can anyone share your screen and give me a demo on that? Yeah, I could get responses from most of the people. Awesome. Okay. So I could see someone's. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Manas Kumar. So this is good. So this is what I was expecting. And any other members here? Already. Okay. Yeah, good. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the demo. That's uh, so let me share the screen again. Okay. So I think I could get like only 10% or 5% of the students have done it. How to implement the counter application. So what I'll do is I will do from my side so that others can get some inputs on them. Okay. So before moving on to the topic for today, I read some feedbacks from you guys. So it's regarding like it seems like I'm going fast in finishing it, and you couldn't try it in the class session. So I want to make one thing clear, and this is something like not something that isn't you cannot compare with your JavaScript part. Okay, so JavaScript in your JavaScript class you might have tried side by side in like the class, and you just tried from your side at the same time during the class. But in the case of React, okay, so you cannot do that. So because this is not something, it's not a language actually. So it's a library. So you need to understand the syntax first. You need to grab everything from our class today, and then you need to implement on your own. So it's not like you can try side by side. Okay, obviously. So it should be something like React should be fast. Okay, so that's the thing. So we have many topics to cover. So that's why first understand the class daily and then try out those things or try out those each and every concepts that I take today and try out those things after the class. Okay, so you cannot you cannot do like in the same time because you cannot concentrate on the part that I'm covering, and you will feel like it is going fast. Okay, so I got some comments from students regarding that. Okay, so please don't expect that. You cannot do that in the case of React. It's not kind of a language. So you can try out. For example, I'm declaring a variable in JavaScript, and you can try out side by side. But this is not the case. First, you need to understand the concept. Then you need to implement on your own. So that's what I want to convey today. So yesterday we saw these topics. So how to start your application, React application, and then I gave you some JSX introduction. So how to write code in JSX. Then I told you what is the difference between class and functional component. Even I created both the components, so class and functional. So that's what. So then the same way I have explained what is a state and what is a props. Okay. So if it feels like yesterday's concept is a bit fast, okay, then it's like you cannot try on your own on the same time. Okay. So that's what the issue raises. So please understand the concepts first, grab the things that I say, and then try it on your own about implementing those tasks that I gave you here. Okay. Obviously, I will give you tasks. Okay. So you in that particular task, these concepts will be covered mostly. So here I told you about the counter.js. So obviously you need to use something called class component. So I told you to create app.js. So app.js is nothing but it is going to have your counter component inside it. Okay, so it can be like functional component because it doesn't have any state, right? So you need not have state, right? So obviously every concepts will be covered inside this particular topic, that which the task that I gave here. Okay, so first understand the class, learn everything, and then please try out your task. Please don't try in the same time. You cannot understand the class or understand the concept behind each and every topic that I cover. Okay, so that's the thing. Already. So let's get started. So I mentioned you about implementing the counter application. So the same thing, you need to create some file called counter.js. Okay. So yesterday's task. So I'm going to quickly go over the things. Okay. So that you can understand the concepts here. Okay. So let's get started now. So here, so what I'll do is I told you, right? So I need to create two components. One is app component. Okay. And one more thing is counter component. This is what I told you yesterday. Okay. And here in my app component, what I told you here, in my app component, I need to have my counter component inside my app component. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll create the counter component. So what is a counter component? I mentioned you. So there should be two buttons. One is increment, decrement, and reset. And there should be a paragraph tag. It should display the count value. And you need to have a state called count. Okay. So that is what we are going to achieve now. Okay. So import. So you need to import React and the component. Okay. So because I'm going to create a class component now. Now I'm going to create a component called counter. That's what I mentioned you already. So it's going to extend your component class from your React. Okay, simple. So this is what I mentioned you yesterday. So basic syntax. So export them. So export default your counter app. Simple. Okay. So we are done with creating a component. So then I mentioned you whenever there is a class component, you need to have a render function, right? So render here. Okay. It should return some JSX element. So what should be inside your render function here? I told you there should be a paragraph tag and 3 buttons. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll do those things now. Okay. The first thing is I need to have a paragraph tag, and it should display my count value. Okay. For now, I will just have this dot state dot counter count here. Okay. I will be declaring the count value in my constructor, and please wait for that. Okay. So here, then I told you I'm going to have 3 buttons. One is for your increment. Okay. So it's going to handle your increment here. Same way, one another thing is for decrement and reset. So it's going to be decrement here. It's going to be reset here. Okay. So for now, I will have 0. Okay. So a basic class level component here. So now we are ready. Okay. So in my app component, I told you I'm going to mention my counter component. Okay. So you don't need any states at all. So you can have a normal functional component, function app. Here, just return some JSX element. So what I'm going to display here, I'm going to have my counter component here, right? So what I'll do is I will import my counter component here. Okay, simple. Same way. So in my app component, I'm going to have my counter component. So this is what the task that I gave you yesterday. And export default app. Simple. Okay. So you have your counter component that displays paragraph tag, and inside that we have three buttons, something like increment, decrement, and reset. Okay. So why I gave in this way? So I'm going to modify. I'm going to have a state for your count value, and whenever I click on increment button, your state should modify. So that's what I'm going to achieve here. Okay. So in my app component, I have a functional component here. Okay. So it's going to return the counter component that is inside my app component. Okay. So simple. So here in my index.js, so I'm going to remove this. I'm going to have my app component here. Okay. And instead of having these things, I can have only my app component. Okay. Simple. So in my index.js, I just rendered my app component. Okay. Inside my app component, here I just rendered my counter component, and inside my counter component, I have a button and a class component and other things. Okay. So what topics are covered here? The class component is done. Your functional component is done. Okay. So in short, we'll be seeing states. In short, we'll be seeing event handling and other things. Okay. So let's run the application. So cd desktop Groovy app. Okay, so I'm going to start my application. So see here, so I zoom the application here. Okay, so as I mentioned, so we have something called count equal to 0, increment, decrement, and reset. Okay, so how it displayed? Because in my index.js, I have my app component. Okay, just rendered the app component. Okay, inside my app component, what I have did here, I just imported my counter component and returned the particular counter component here. Okay, so that's why this is being displayed here. Okay, so same way here. Okay, so now we are done. Now, what are the topics covered now? So you mentioned like create React app is done, J6 introduction is done, and we created two components, class and function. Okay, so let's see other things now. So we saw fragments. So everything is covered in your task itself. Okay, so once you do this particular task, everything will every concept that I explained yesterday will be covered. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'm going to have a state, okay, to have counter value here. So what I'm trying to achieve here is when I click on increment, it should increment here. Same decrement, it should decrement, reset, and other things. Okay. So how to do that? So I'll have a constructor. Okay. So if you use a constructor in your child class, you need to call the super class, right? So your component class. So you need to use something called super. Okay. So basic Java. So here I can mention my state. So this dot state here, okay, and I can have some count value inside it. So initially it should be 0. Okay, simple. Okay, and I'm going to use the same value here. So this dot state dot count. Okay, simple as that. So if I refresh, the count value still remains the same. Okay, so now when I click on increment, decrement, and reset, okay, I need to increment by value my value here. Okay, so how can I do that? So I told you, right? So here you can have a function called increment, decrement, and reset, and have those manipulations here. Okay, so here I'm going to have a increment here. Okay, so increment. Okay, here what I'll do. So I need to modify the state, right? So state value. So can we do it in this way? So state dot count equal to this dot state dot count plus 1. Okay, so can it do this? Will it modify? Yes. Okay, so now what you need to do, so that's why we have something called fetch state. Okay, so here, instead of having this, you need to have something called fetch state here. Okay, and count. So you are going to change the count value, right? So what is the count value? So here this dot state dot count plus one. Okay, simple as that. Same way for decrement. Here decrement it should be minus one. Okay, same way for reset. So for reset, what you need to do, you just have the zero directly because it's going to be reset here, right? So you can directly give in this. So now we are done. Okay. So since this is like one line, you can mention them in one line itself. Okay. So we have only one line statement, right? So the basic arrow functions. So if arrow function has only one line, you can mention it in one line. Okay. So I don't need the curly braces. So your code gets ready. So increment, decrement function, everything is ready. Okay. So now what you need to do, when you click on increment, you should call the increment function. Same way when you click on decrement, you should call the decrement function. Same applies for your reset. Okay. So how can I do that? So here button on click, I mentioned to you right. So see here on click. So I told you right. So on click, what you need to do? You have to call this dot increment here. Same way on click. Okay. Here it should be this dot decrement. Simple. Okay. So on click. So when you click on that particular button, it should make you the reset functionalities. Okay. So done. So we are done with the changes now. So now your event handling is done. So how to create a function and how to declare the state and how to modify the state. Okay. So everything is done. Okay. Now go over here. Okay. So if I refresh, so if I do increment, what should happen? It should increment. See. So if I do decrement, it should decrement. So if I do reset, it is default here. Okay. Increment, reset, increment, decrement, reset. Okay. So this is the task that I gave you yesterday. Okay. So clear on this? Do you guys have any questions? I'm happy that at least 10 members you have tried it. Okay. So I just want to clarify the same thing with other students as well. Okay. So it will be very simple. Okay. You need to have a state. You need to have three functions. When you click on that function button, it should call that particular function here. Okay. So very simple, right? So do you guys clear about this? So if you have tried this particular example without using any tutorials or without using any sort of things, okay? So you might have learned many things inside this. So how to render, how to create a function, and other things. Okay. So hopefully this was your first task. Okay. So now let's move on to the today's topic. Okay. So I just explained you how just now I demoed you how to create a counter application here. So that's what the first topic is. We are done. Okay. So now, okay. So before moving on to the next topic, do you have any doubts? Do you guys have any doubts on the basics here? Can everyone confirm? So do you guys have any issues or if you face any issues or whatever, if you don't know what happens here, do you need to explain again? Okay. So now, before moving on to the topic here, life cycle methods, okay. So I will show you one thing here, okay. So I use something called arrow function. Okay. So why did if I use arrow function, if I don't use arrow function, what will happen here? So here, if I don't use arrow function, okay, so here, so I'm using arrow function now. Okay, suppose if I don't use arrow function, a normal function here. Okay, so normal function. So what if I do increment here? Okay, so I'll do inspect here. So if I do increment, see, it will throw me an error. Okay, so what is the reason here? So see here, I just use normal function and just initially change the state, but it's throwing me an error. So what is the reason here? So if you learned or if you understand the concept of bind, so when I took JavaScript, so I mentioned you about bind and other things. So what it happens here is you have used this inside your function, right? This particular this will point to your function that you created, okay, instead of pointing to your class, okay. So your this dot tested should point to your class object, right? So when you print this here, okay, what should happen? It should enter the objects that are very specific to um, your class compound, okay. So when you print your this here, okay, so see here now. So I'm going to print my this inside my render function, okay. So if I do the refresh here, see, so basic thing. So your class, this will be pointing to your class, okay. So whatever the class object, class properties, your increment, decrement, reset, and your count, state, and props, everything is a property, right? So see here, decrement, increment, props, reset, state, everything is a property of it, okay. But when you use a normal function in your increment here, this particular this will be overwritten and it will be undefined here, okay. So see, so here we print this. So now if I do increment here, see, it's undefined, because when you use a normal function, your this will be overwritten. So instead this particular this will be pointing to your function here, and that's why undefined, okay. So that's why we used something called arrow function, okay. So now if I do the same thing here, see, now it's pointing to the your class object and displaying your count value here, okay. So suppose this is one case, okay. Suppose if there is no arrow function, what we need to do? So what is other possibilities that you know? If you don't have arrow function, exactly, you need to use something called bind, okay. So basically you need to bind the function here. So something like this dot increment, okay. So this dot increment dot bind of this, okay. So if we do this, okay, it should work actually. So here, okay, I will have function here, okay. So now I'm going to refresh. So if I do increment, see, now it's pointing to your object, okay. So either you need to use something called bind here, okay, or you can directly use your arrow function, okay. So this is a representation of, I mentioned you, right, the difference between a normal function and arrow function. This is the one kind of an example. The same example I showed you on that day. Okay, I am showing here with the same example in React, okay. So if you don't want to bind in this way, so before ES6 comes, okay, so we used to have in this way, okay. So then there came something called arrow function. So we don't need it in this way, okay. We can directly call your arrow function, and your arrow function will not remember the this, okay. So simple. So for the first, and increment, decrement, reset, okay. So clear on this. So clear on the difference between the bind. So that's why I took a class before starting with React. Okay. So I want to cover the JavaScript part that are only specific to React. So you might have learned many topics in React. I mean JavaScript. Okay. But I just covered only certain things in your React class because which are very specific to your React application alone. Okay. So now what we'll do is just give me a second. Here the next topic is life cycle methods, okay. So this is the last fundamentals that you need to know before starting with React, okay. So we saw JSX, components, properties, state, fragments, and event handling, okay. So the last thing that we need to cover here is life cycle methods, okay. So life cycle methods, if I go on to the documentation, so these are the life cycle methods, okay. So I will explain each and everything now. Okay. So, so what is the life cycle method before you start into the example? Okay. So what is the life cycle method? I mentioned you yesterday. So what is the life cycle method here? So here in our counter component. Exactly. So what is the life cycle method is? So life cycle methods are nothing but your component class here, right? So you have a component class, and your class extends your component class, right? This particular component class in your React has certain methods. For example, render, okay, and there are multiple methods, something like component did mount, component did update. So these are all something called a methods, okay. So those are something called life cycle methods. So you are extending a class from your React called component class. That particular component class has certain methods, something called render, and we have some other functions called component did mount and update and other things, okay. So those things are called life cycle methods. So now you can ask me a question. So what is the purpose of your life cycle methods? So that's the question here, right? So I already mentioned your life cycle method yesterday, something called render. Okay. And I mentioned you one thing. So whenever there is a state change happens, for example, you are modifying your state to a certain value, right? So whenever I click on increment here, okay, you are changing the value of your state here plus one. Okay. Same way for whenever I click on decrement, it should be minus one. And same applies for your reset. Okay. So whenever you modify the state, how it is modify, how it is rendering your application again. So here, so how it is calling the re-render function, and that's something called your lifecycle method. Okay, so basic flows. So lifecycle methods are nothing but a hierarchy. Okay, so your function will be called automatically. Okay, whenever you do certain changes. Okay, so to start with the theoretical part here. So in your life cycle methods, there are three phases. Okay, one is mounting, one is updating, and one is unmounting. Okay, so I will explain you each and everything now. Okay, so what is the mounting? So mounting is nothing but here in your index.html. Okay, so something like divide root, right? So you are placing your application, your React application, into a div called root here, right? That is something called mounting phase. Okay, the initial phase, that's something called mounting phase here. So the first thing that will be called in your mounting phases, suppose you created a class component. Okay, the first thing is here is constructor. So you these are all things you already know. So first thing that will be called is constructor. Okay, so then what is the thing that is called in your mounting phase? Render. Okay, so initially the state is zero, something called count equal to zero. Okay, automatically it is going to render a function here. So see here now, I'm refreshing here. Okay, so what is happening? So initially your count value is zero. Okay, so that's how it is rendering here. So by default, the constructor will be called first, then your render function will be called. Okay, so if I have 5 here, okay, and refresh here. Okay, so see here, the initial state value has been assigned to the UI. Okay, so that's how your life cycle methods work. So mounting phase is nothing but you are going to mount your React application into your DOM here. Okay, that is something called mounting, the initial phase here. So initially it should call constructor. Here you will be initiating all your initialize all your state value. Okay, and you are not calling your render function in any part of the code. See here, so you are not calling your render method, right? It is automatically called. Okay, so that's how your life cycle method works. Okay, so your mounting phase, constructor will be called, then the render function will be called, and that's why you are seeing the initial value being printed here. Okay, so initially in the count it has 5. Okay, this function is called, and then render function will be also called. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll do console things. Okay, so console.log of, so this is mounting phase, right? So what I'll do is this is constructor. Okay, I'll have it in this way. So constructor. Okay, I'll just do a console. Okay, so constructor all. Same way here, render is called. Okay, so render call. Okay, so if I go here and refresh the page, see, initially your constructor is called, I mentioned you already. Okay, then the render function will be called. Okay, so this is the hierarchy in your mounting phase. So in your mounting phase, the first thing that will be called is your constructor. Okay, so then the render function will be called. Okay, and the next phase is component did mount. Okay, so before that, this is not a method. Okay, it's a message here. Okay, what is the message? React updates your DOM and references. Okay, so what it means is until your React here, so until your constructor, okay, here, okay, so what happens here, the initialization are done. Okay, then your render function is being called. Okay, and these particular things, right? So these are all the some HTML element, right? That will be mounted into your DOM. Okay, so that's something called, so into your real DOM. Okay, so that's something called React updates your DOM. Okay, so simple message there. Okay, so then next, what is the method that will be called? So first is constructor, then is render, and then it is something called component did mount. Okay, so component did mount is nothing but it's a confirmation. Okay, that your render, right? So this particular render is happened successfully. So now you can do any other API calls over here. Okay, so see here now. I will have component date mount. Okay, so these are all methods that are given by your class conf. Okay, so here I am going to console. So what I'm going to console, just component date mount is called. Okay, see, I'm going to do a refresh now. See, first constructor is called, then the render will be called, and component did mount will be called. Okay, so that's how your mounting phase happens. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you a logical question. Okay, so when the UI has been rendered, your component did mount is called. Okay, so what should be the logic that you should write here? Okay, so what is the purpose of this method? Any answers? So once render is been called and it is complete successfully mounted into your DOM, okay, your component did mount function is automatically called. Okay, so then what logics or what is the purpose of that particular method? Any guess? Any idea on that? So why do we need that method? Exactly. Someone mentioned in the comments. Okay. So once your page is loaded, you might need to do some things that needed after the page load. For example, once your page is loaded, we will be fetching data from the API, right? So using fetch API. Okay. So you can write those logics here. Okay. So what it means is initially your page is loaded, and after the page is loaded, this particular function will be called something called component did mount. We can write some logic. Okay, so you might have a requirement something like once your page is loaded, you need to call or you need to update certain things. Okay, so those logics you can write here. Okay, basically what we will write here is we will write something called API calls here. Okay, so using fetch API or any other libraries. Okay, so what it means here is, suppose you have to display all the students list here. Okay, so students list from your server. Okay, so students list, what we'll do is we'll first just render the page, render our table here. Okay, suppose you need to display all the students list in a table. Okay, so that's consider that is a requirement. Okay, so firstly initially we will render an empty table. Okay, so then once your page is loaded, we will make an API call to the server using the fetch API. Okay, and get the data from your server and update the state. Okay, and again render function will be called and your table will be displaying the students details. Okay, so that is the purpose of your component did mount. Okay, so inside your component did mount, if you want to write some logics like after the page is loaded, you need to write some logic, you can write it in this place. Okay, so this is the right place you need to write, you need to mention those logics here. Okay, so that is the component did mount. Okay, so clear on the mounting phase? Can everyone confirm? Clear on the mounting phase? So these are all some fundamentals. Please ask if you have any questions now itself. Okay. Is it like sync or sync? No, I couldn't get your question. So what does sync and async doing here? So you mean the hierarchy? The hierarchy would be like the first is constructor will be called, initializations are done. Then your render function will be called and initial page will be loaded. Okay. Then if you want to do some changes in your application, once the page is loaded, you can call them here, component did mount. Okay. So this is the mounting phase at the first time. So in the first time, if you want to load some data or you need to make some changes to your page, you can write those logics here. Okay, so that's what component did mount is. As the name suggests, your component has been mounted to your DOM successfully. That's what component did mount. Okay, so your component here, right? It is completely rendered here. Okay, and it gives you a confirmation here, and you can write some logics over here. Okay, so what will happen in case of functional component, because functional component does not have constructor. In functional component, you don't have life cycle methods at all. In the first class itself, I mentioned, right? Your state, your life cycle methods, there is nothing in your functional component. Okay, there is one. These are all only for your class component. In your functional component, there is only like you can have props or properties, and you need to have some return statement. Okay, so only those things are available in your functional component. Okay, so other things are like lifecycle method, state, and everything is only for your class component. Okay, so now we are done with our mounting phase. Okay, so constructor, render, and component did mount is being called and successful. Okay, so now what is an updating phase? So updating phase is nothing but you call your set state, right? So here you have a set state. Okay, so you are updating your state here. Okay, so initially it's count equal to 5. Okay, then you are using set state here, and that is something called updating phase. So updating your state. So what are the possibles of updating? So when you call set state, that is something called updating. When you get a new property, and that's something called updating phase. And there is one more thing called force update. I will show you in short. Okay, so basic thing here is whenever you make a set state, okay, there is an updating phase happening here. Okay, so that's the thing. So if there are more than one type of component in a project, each of them component is more than approximately what will be the priority. If there are more than one component, means here you are modifying only your counter component here. So here your counter component. Okay, so when you click on increment and decrement function, only this particular component only will be affecting. Okay, suppose here, for example, here in my app component, what I'll do is I'll do a console here. Okay, so console.log of app component loaded. Okay, so this is a component, this is an app component, and this is a counter component. Okay, so see here, I'm doing a refresh. First, your app component is loaded. Okay, as we know already, because inside your index.js, we have our app component. Okay, so app component is loaded. Here, I just made a console called app component loaded. Here, app component loaded. Okay, so then inside my app component, I mentioned my counter component. Okay, so now my counter component will be loading here. Okay, so how it happens? First, constructor is called. Okay, so then render is called, as you know. Okay, then component mount is called. Okay, so now if I do some changes in increment, okay, only this particular component will be affected. Okay, not your app component. Okay, so that is why it is we saw virtual DOM concept, right? So if you want to modify only one particular component, okay, it will not affect other components or start from the scratch. It will affect only that particular component and give the patch. So that's what I mentioned here. So here virtual DOM. So this is what I mentioned you in your first class. So if you know the theory, now it's very easy for you to understand. See, this is your React, okay? And there is a real DOM here that's happening here, okay? And it takes your React takes a copy of your real DOM and have it in its memory called virtual DOM, okay? Suppose here, consider, so this is the index component. Here there is something called app component. Inside your app component, you have something called counter component, okay? Consider in this way. If you do some changes in your counter component, okay, only that particular component will be loaded. Okay, so it will not affect your index component or app component. Okay, again it will not be loaded. That's what happening here. See, initially app component is loaded, then constructor, this is something like in your counter component, then render component did mount. Okay, so then if you do some changes, it will affect only your component, not the app component. Okay, so every component is different from other. Okay, if you do some changes in that particular component, only that particular component will be loaded. Okay, so that's how your React works, and that's why React is so fast. Okay, so now let's move on to the updating phase. Okay, so updating phase is nothing but your set state, right? So here, whenever I click on that particular increment and decrement function, what I'm doing here, it will call my increment function. So in my increment function, I'm calling my this dot set state. Okay. So whenever there is a state change happens, your render function will automatically called. Okay. I mentioned you yesterday, right? Whenever you call set state, your render function will automatically be called. Okay. So that's how, see here, set state. Whenever you do a set state, render function will be automatically called. Okay. So let's see it in action. So I'm doing a refresh here. Okay. So initially it's 5. Now if I do increment, see, render is called. If I do decrement, render will be called. Increment, see, it is called again and again. Decrement and reset. Okay, see, it's working as expected. Okay, that's why I mentioned you. Your state is different from a normal variable. So you can have many variable here. Okay, so this dot name or this dot name, anything here. So it's a normal class, right? JavaScript class. But if you mention something in your state, okay, and use set state, okay, your render function will automatically call. Okay, then only your UI will be updated. Okay, so that is the purpose of your state here. Okay, so now your render function has been automatically called, and this is something called updating phase. See, if I do decrement, render is called increment and other things. Okay, so that's the thing. So now, what is the next phase? Whenever there is a render happening here, okay, so then again your React updates your DOM. So what is the updates here? If I do increment, it is updating your UI to 6 to 7, right? So now it's 7. If I do decrement, it's going to 6, right? So that is the thing happening here in your render function here. Okay. So once it is done, render has been called. The next phase in your component update here is, it is something called component update. Okay. So now let's see component update. So I will do the calls here. Okay. So it's going to be component update. Okay. Simple here. Okay. So now see here now. I'm refreshing the page. Okay. Constructor render and component mount is called. Okay. This is mounting phase. This is something called initial phase. Your initial initializations are done now. Okay. So now if I do increment, it's updating phase. See, render is called and automatically component update is called. See? So what I do, whenever I do a set state, automatically your render will be called. It updates your UI. Then to have a confirmation, as the name mentioned here, your component has been updated. Okay, that's something called component did update. Okay, see here. So if I do increment, okay. So if I do decrement, okay. So reset, see here, decrement, increment, and everything. So for each and every update happening in your application, these two lifecycle methods will be called render and component did update. Okay, clear? Clear on this? Clear on the updating phase? So then now you can ask me the question. So what is the logics we can write inside your component did update? Okay, again, you can do some API calls. Okay, so I'll show you a scenario. So here you go to the google.com. Okay, so whatever that you type here, okay, it is going to give you a suggestion here, right? So something like this. Okay, so how it is happening here? So whenever you type in here, what will happen? You're basically consider this is a React application. Okay, so whenever you type in here, what will happen? You will update your state, right? For example, here, for example, this is a search term here, right? So this is the scenario. See, watch it clearly. Search term, okay, and initially it should be empty. Okay, so now what I will do is I will have a input text here. Okay, so type equal to text. Okay, so what I'll do is on change. Okay, on change, I am modifying my state now. Okay, so you can write another function here. Okay, or you can directly call your this dot set state here. It's up to you. So this dot set state. Okay, and updating that particular text. Okay, so whatever the text that you type in here, it will be updated in your search term. Okay, something like this. So inside your set state here, you can update that particular text here. Okay, so whatever that you type in. Okay, consider this is a scenario. So whenever you do a state change here, okay, so whenever you do a set state here, your component update will be called, right? Okay, so in that case here, whatever that you type in here, it should get response from your server. Okay, so if I type something like this, okay, so it is going to your server and getting that particular data. Same if I type here, it is going to get some data. Same if I type here, it is going to get some data from your server based on your typing here. Okay, so those logics you can write inside your component update. Okay, component did mount is nothing but if you want to load initially at for one point of time, whenever your page is loaded, you need to get some data, right? So those data is you can write, you can make those API calls here using fetch API. Same way, what about the component did update here? So whenever type in, if you want, so this is one sort of an example. So if I type in here, okay, it is showing me the response from server. Same way, if I type in something like this, it is getting response from the server. So those API calls, you can write it in this place, okay? So that is the real-time scenario. So component mount will be called only once when your application is initialized, okay? Component update will be called whenever there is a state change happens, okay? So updating phase, see here, whenever there is a set state happens, render and component update will be called. And based on your current state, for example, currently if you typed something like weather, okay, something like if you typed weather, you should get the data based on the weather here, right? The suggestions, okay? So those logics you can write in this particular place here, okay? So that's the thing. So clear on this, clear on the updating part. Can everyone confirm? Please understand the concept alone now, okay? So please don't try side by side, you will miss the concept, okay? So please try out them in the later point of time. So now please understand the concepts first, ask any questions if you have, okay? So I will clear all your doubts, then try yourself with the task that I give, okay? So once you understand the task and finish your task, or if when you do that particular task, you will get some questions maybe, okay? Then you can ask the questions tomorrow in the session, okay? So hope this particular updating phase is understanding for you guys. Okay, so I could get some response. So I could see 36 people in this session. Okay, but I could get response always from two, like 10 people. Okay, so do you guys understand? Do you guys understand the concept? Yeah, you can add some new props as well. So from props is nothing but you need to send the data from your app.js here. So if you want to send some props, yes, okay. This props can be modified in later point of time. We will see it in the upcoming class. Okay. So for now, you need to understand what is here is whenever you do modify your state, render is called, and then automatically component update will be called. Okay. So that's the thing. Okay. Okay. I could get some response. Okay. Thank you guys. So now to the last phase, unmounting. Okay. So what does unmounting? So you know what is mounting now. Okay. So mounting is nothing but initially you react your component, whenever your component is loaded, your counter component is loaded into your DOM. That's something called mounting phase. So then what is unmounting phase? Any guess? Exactly. So someone mentioned in the comments. So your component is removed. Okay. So that's the thing. For example, you have some show button here. Okay. Show hide. Okay. So when you click on show hide button, this component should be hidden. Okay. Same way, if I click on the same button again, it should show. Okay. So that is something called your, I'm just removing, adding, removing, adding, removing, adding my component there. Okay. So that is something called component will unmount. Okay. So let's see. We will implement that feature. So when I click on show, it should show this particular, when I click on show here, it should display this particular component. If I do hide there, it should hide this particular component. Okay. So let's see. So where we can do that? We can do that in my app component here. Okay. So what I will do is I will modify this to last component. Okay. So because we need to show and hide them. Okay. So then we need a state to track those show hide. Okay. So that's why. So I'm modifying this to class component now. So class app extends your component class from React. Okay. Here it should be render function. Okay. Okay. Simple component now. Okay. So now here I will have a state. Okay. So inside my constructor, I need to call my super this dot state. Okay. So what I'll do is I will have a button. I will have a variable called show here. Okay. So initially it's true. Okay, so initially it's true. So what I'll do is here in my render from component counter function here, I will write a condition. Okay, so if this dot state dot show is true, okay, I will show the counter component. Else, I will have empty arguments here. Okay, simple here, right? So this dot state dot show. If this dot state dot show is available, if it is true, it is we will render counter. If it is false, we will have empty here. Okay, so it is true because it is showing here. Okay, so if it is false, so it will be empty here. Okay, so that's the concept here. Okay, so what I'll do is we need to have a button here, right? Show here, right? So I will create a function here. So I will have a button here. I will have a button. Okay, so something called show, okay, or hide. Okay, something like this. Now so here what I'll do is, what's happening here, I need to have it in this way. Okay, so I have a button here. Okay, so on click, what I'll do is I will update my state. Okay, so I can create a function called set show or whatever the thing. Okay, so something like here, set show, a normal function. Okay, here what I'll do is, if my state has show equal to false, I will modify it to true. If it is true, I will modify it to false. Okay, how can I do that? So this dot set state. Okay, here I need to update the state, right? Show. Okay, so show here. So currently it's false, right? If you want to modify it to true, so we need to basically have this particular thing. So not operator. Okay. So what happens here? So currently, if it is true here, we click on that particular button, the show will be false now because initially it's true. So opposite of true, it's false, right? That particular false will be updated. Okay. So that's what we have done here. So now the function is ready. Okay, so I have a button here. Okay, so set here and other things here. Okay, so now here I need to have my counter component, right? So I remove that particular counter component. Okay, so see how to write the conditions here. Okay, so inside your JSX, so if you are, so whenever you use a statement, something called your state and other things, you need to have something called empty, this particular curly braces. So I mentioned you on the JSX class. Okay, so see, if this dot state dot show, okay, so if that is the case, what you need to render your counter component. Okay, so something like this. Okay, else it should be empty. Okay, simple condition. If the state dot show is true, okay, so initially it's true, it will display counter here. Okay, if it is false, just render empty element. So what it means is, if I do this, if I do hide here, it is removed from your component, right? So removed from your UI, right? So that's something called your unmounting phase. Okay, so there is a function called component will unmount. Okay, so I'm going to counter here. Okay, so component will unmount. Okay, so I will do the API calls here. Okay, so okay, so now see the hierarchy. Okay, so this is mounting phase. Okay, your constructor is called, render is called, component mount is called. Okay, so this is, you understand this. Okay, so now updating phase. If I do increment, okay, my render function will be called and component update will be called. See, set state, render will be called and component update will be called. Now we have unmounting. So unmounting is nothing but if you hide this or if you remove this particular component from your UI or DOM, that particular function will be called, right? See, I'm going to click on this button. See, component will unmount is called. So how it is happening here? Because you have removed that particular component called counter component from your UI here, okay? Because you have added a condition here, right? So whenever you click on that particular button, show hide button, what you are doing here? So if it is true, you are updating to false. If it is false, you are updating to true. Okay. So here, when I click on that particular button, okay. So based on the state show, you are displaying your counter. Okay. So if it is show, if the show is true, you just rendering your counter. Okay, if it is false, you are just rendering an empty element. So what it means is you are removing your counter component from the UI. Okay, so that's what happening here. And when you hide your component from the UI, that is something called component will unmount. Okay, automatically your component in the unmount section will be called here. Okay, see, we didn't call it at any point of time. This particular function will be automatically called if this particular UI is being called. Okay, so now you are going to show answer me. I'm going to click show. Okay, so what is the face now? So if I click on this particular button, what will happen? Mounting face, exactly. So if I click on this, see, app component is loaded. Okay, so then the constructor is called, render called, component it mount will be called. Okay, so now if I do increment and decrement and other things, okay, so the decrement, it is only for the updating phase. Okay, so here this is happening here. Okay, so now if I click on the same button again, you are going to remove that particular component from the UI, right? So it's something called deleting the component. So click on that, component will unmount is called. Okay, so that's something called unmounting. Okay, clear on this? So clear on the life cycle methods, clear on the concepts? Can everyone confirm? So this is a main fundamental that you need to know. So we will be using all those things. So basically we'll be using component it mount. Okay, and in some part of time we'll be using component it update based on the requirement. Okay, so automatically you know what is rendered, you know what is constructor. Okay, and whenever there is a state change happens, you know already there is based on the phase like mounting phase or updating phase, based on the state changes, that particular function will be called. Okay, so you need to know these things. What is the mounting phase, updating, and unmount? Okay, so can everyone confirm? So I need a confirmation from everyone now. So if we place component will unmount function in app component, it won't be invoked. Yes, it won't be invoked because that we are not hiding your app component here, right? Your app component still have show hide button, so it is not unmounting phase for your app component, but it is the unmounting phase for your counting component alone. Okay, so I could get some responses in the chat. So what is the difference between three phase? Oh no, that's what I mentioned here. Okay, so three phases are nothing but mounting, the initial rendering of your component. Okay, so first thing, whenever I refresh the page, you are counting, your face is loading here, right? That is something called your mounting phase. Okay, then whenever you update your state, okay, so that's what here mentioned. So whenever you update your state, your render function will be called again. See, if I do here, render is called and component update is called. That's something called updating phase. Unmounting is nothing but your particular component is removed from the UI, that is unmounted from the UI. And automatically your component will unmount will be called. Okay, so that's the difference between the three phases. All right. Okay, now force update. Yeah, I will come in short. Just give me a minute. Okay, so apart from this particular life cycle methods, there are around 3 to 4 life cycle methods. Okay, so we won't use them, but I will show you the list. Okay, so you can take it for interview. So basically they will ask only these things. Okay, so if you click on here, show less common life cycles here. Okay, so this is the actual life cycle methods. Okay, so in the mounting phase, what I showed you, once constructor will be called, then the render function will be called. Okay, so then component mount will be called. This is what I showed you yesterday, I mean just now. Okay, so here there is a one more function that is happening between your constructor and render. That's something called get derived state from props. Okay, same way in your updating phase. So these are there is some difference. Okay, so you don't need to know this. Okay, so in order to show you some in order to show you the force update things, I need to explain only one life cycle methods from that particular list. Okay, so these are some commonly used life cycle methods. Okay, so other life cycle methods like get derived state from props and get snapshot before update, so we'll not be using these things. So I skipped three things: get derived state from props, should component update, and get snapshot before update. update. Okay, so as per the documentation itself, it is not like of major importance. Okay, so I will not be using at any point of time. So I'm using React for past 4 years. I never use these life cycle phases. Okay, so that's why your React document is itself, this is React's documentation. Okay, so they itself mention it as yeah, show less life cycle, common life cycle methods. Okay, so here, if you want to know other life cycle methods, okay, so actual hierarchy is this. Okay, before your constructor, okay, so I told you in your render mounting phase, constructor is called, and then your render function will be called. Okay, but there is one more phase between them. That's something called get derived state from prop. Okay, so there will be a method here. Okay, so get derived state from props. So there might have been removed there. Okay, so get derived state from props. Okay, so then your mounting phase is automatically same. Okay, there is no difference at all now. Okay, in the updating phase, okay, again, whenever you modify a state, okay, so your get derived state from props will be called, and there is one more thing called should component update. Okay, so this is the only thing that I will explain you now. Okay, so should component update, and render will be automatically called, and then there is a method called get snapshot before update. So you might have seen here, so get snapshot before update. Okay, so you need not know that. Okay, so I will explain about the should component update alone now. Okay, so now here, where's the should component update is happening? Set state, and before your render is called. So here, I'm going to refresh this. So I'm doing increment here, right? So here, so what it doing here? There is a render method will be called. So render method will be called, and component update will be called. There is a one more phase, one more method before render method. Okay, that is something called should component update. Okay, so I'll show you the difference now. Okay, should component update. So as the name suggests you, okay, so what would be the thing here? So can anyone guess? So here, what is something I mentioned should component update. Okay, so it is going to be whenever I click on set state and other things. Okay, so if I do an increment here, it's updating my component to 2, right, from 1 to 2. Okay, how it is happening? Because it is calling render method again, and then component update will be called. Okay, so before these two things, there is one more phase called should component update. So as the name here, can anyone guess from the name itself? Exactly. Okay, so here, if you return false, okay, if you return false here, I will do a console again here. Okay, so if you return false here, okay, refresh here. Okay, see, your render, your it will not be rendered. Okay, see what your should component update is called. Okay, so there you mentioned return equal to false. You just returned false. What it means is your React is asking you a question: do I need to update my render, or do I need to do I need to call my render function again to re-render the new things? Okay, and then you are mentioning that no, with returning false. Okay, so that's why it's not updating your state. See here now, but it will be updating your state here. Okay, so now your state count value will be increased. Okay, but you are stopping the things to be modified in the U1. Okay, so see here, decrement and increment here. Okay, so what is the use case of it? So we basically use it for something like read only forms and other things. Okay, suppose you have a form and you need to have them for read only phases. Okay, so we will use should component update there, and we'll be returning false. Okay, so the entire UI or the entire for your form will be read only. So read only. Okay, so that's the thing. So if you return true here, okay, so you're giving answer that please update your render function. Please call your render function, update the UI. Okay, so if I do this, so now if I do increment, it will work as expected. Okay, if we don't mention this, by default it's true. Okay, so that's why it's rendering as expected. See, increment. Okay, if you want to explicitly have your should component update to false, okay, meaning that you need not update your UI. Okay, you can have a should component update here and return false here. Simple as that. Okay, see. So it will not change the UI, but your state value will be increased by default. Okay. Clear on the should component update? So if should component update is returned false, its purpose will be similar to state rather than set state, as it just update but not render. Yes, sir. Yes. Exactly. So basic thing of your should component update is you need not update your component. Okay. So it should be the same when it was in the initial phase. Okay. You need not update the UI again. Okay. So that's the purpose of returning false inside your should component update. Okay. Clear on this? Can everyone confirm? All right. Okay. So now, let's move on to the force update here. Okay. So now, you might have guessed it. So what is force update? So any guesses? I could see many brilliant people here answering all the questions. So what would be the force update here? You are nearer to the question, nearer to the answer. Let's see. Okay. So here, exactly. So even if you mention here, should component should will having written false. Okay. It will update the UI if you use something called force update. Okay. So see here now. So I will show you the difference. Okay. So I'm returning false now. Okay. So here I will have a button called force update. Okay. So to understand the difference between them. So force update. Okay. So there is a function that is given by your class component itself. That is something called force update. So this dot force update. Okay. So whenever you click on that particular button, you should call your force update directly. Okay. So that's the thing. Or you can directly mention it in this way. That's not an issue. Okay. So I have a button here called force update. Okay. So okay, then I need to call it in this way. So force update. Okay. So now, okay, see here now. I'm going to refresh. I am having return false here. Okay. So returning false here. Okay. If I do increment, I'm going to click on increment now. Okay. So I have clicked the increment now. Okay. So what will be the state value of count now? It should be 1, right? So but it will not be reflecting in the UI. So what is the reason? Because you have written false here. Okay. So now if I do force update, see, it will update the UI. Okay. So basic thing of force update here is whatever the main thing, whatever you written here from your should component update. Okay. It can be false, it can be true and anything. Okay. It will update your UI. It will not see anything. It will update the UI with the latest state value. Okay. So what is the state value? It will be, for example, here it is currently your count value is 1 in your state. I'm going to click for 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So I click on 5 times. Okay. Should component is called. Okay. So now what will be the count value? It should be 6. Okay. So force update. See, the latest value is taken in by the inside your state, and it is updating your UI. Okay. So the same applies here. So whenever you click on force update, your render function will be called and component update will be called. Okay. So see here. So whenever you modify the state, what will happen? Inside your should component update will be called. So please don't mind this. Whenever you do a set state, it will call your should component update. Inside that, if you return true, it will render and component update here. If you mention false, okay, no other state, okay, it will stop from here. So that's what I mentioned you here. Okay. So if you click on increment, okay, it will stop there itself because you returned false from should component update. Okay. But if you go with your force update, okay, it will call directly your render. It will not see your should component update at all. Okay. It will directly call your force update. Okay. And then for component update will be called. So you might have noticed it. Should component update will not be called here. Okay, see, refresh. Okay, I'm going to increment for 2 times, 1, 2. Okay, should component update is called. Okay, so now if I do force update, your render method will be directly called. Okay, it will not consider your should component update method at all. Okay, but if you do normal state changes, so I will have true here now. Okay, so if I do no, if you do normal state changes, increment, you'll go to the should component update, check for the condition. If it is true, it will render. If it is false, it will not go to the render function at all. Okay. But force update, see here, you'll call render method directly, and the component update will be called automatically. Okay. So it will not consider your should component update at all. So that is the purpose of your force update. Okay. Clear? Clear on this? Clear on the lifecycle methods? No, you should never use your force update. Okay. So it's just for the theoretical purpose. We never use force update. Okay. So that is like that's not the right way to code. Okay. So there may be some situation, but the suggestion or the right code standard is you need to modify the state and handle everything with your state. Okay. So that is how your React should work. Okay. Please don't use force update. Okay, so clear on this topic. So we are done with our life cycle methods. Okay, I'll share you this diagram. Okay, so whenever you go for an interview, okay, just go over this document here. Okay, just go over this particular diagram that here mentioned here. So it would be very feasible to answer the questions. Okay, so it will be very clear here. Okay, so this is the documentation given by your React itself. So if you go into the React uh, documentation here. Okay. Documentation here, main concepts and life cycle. So here, this is the documentation of React here. Okay. So so here, so this is the documentation. So if you click on this particular documentation, this is the diagram that has been given by your React itself. Okay. So that's what I just explained you so far. Okay. So we are done with our life cycle methods. So your part is done. Okay. So overall, do you guys have any questions? So in your React, we completed our basics. So if you go on to the documentation here, main concepts. So most of them here. So some are basics. So your introduction to JX, rendering the elements, components and properties, states and life cycle. And we saw how to handle events. So what are the, how to handle events like handle change and handle click, right? So that is the thing. Conditional rendering is nothing but here I mentioned you mentioned a condition here, right? So if there is a state equal to show, then mention then render the counter component. If it is not, just mention an empty element. Okay, so that is what your conditional rendering is. Okay, so the next thing is we will be seeing some other topics inside here. Then we will be seeing go over with the advanced guide. Okay, so basic thing is this is the fundamentals. Okay, so your life cycle methods, states, props, how your component should be created, what is JSX, how to handle events, how to mention fragments, and how to add conditions here. Okay, so we are done everything with our a basic thing now. Okay, so we are done with our fundamentals. Okay, so collectively, do you guys have any questions before moving on to the next thing? So we can't update UI in case of functional component. Please wait for the next 2 to 3 classes. So you will get to know how to use update your UI based in your functional component. Okay, so there is a concept behind that. So collectively, do you guys have any questions? So starting with your fundamentals, React, and other things. So now we have completed 3 sessions in your React. Okay. So one is we saw in the first class we saw the theoretical part. Then we implemented them yesterday using create React app and JSX. Then we just I gave you a task like counter application. So try out your counter app like increment and decrement and other things. Today I completed life cycle methods. Okay. So until this stage, so you should be at least know how your React works now. Okay. So difference or need for index.js and app.js files. Okay, so difference in the case here, I told you, right, the first file that will be called is your index.html. Okay, so then the file that will be called is index.js. Okay, so here is the place we will do some configuration. So what is the configuration? So here you mentioned React DOM.render, right? So here, this is the configuration. Once you have done here, okay. So now your app component here, right? So that's what you rendered here. So this is app component is your first component that is rendered, okay, in your UI. Okay, so that's the meaning. So in your app component acts as a first component, and here is what you start appending all the components. Okay, for example, so for example, this is the document. Okay, so this is the what virtual DOM is. So here, what you have done here, so initially there should be a real DOM, okay, then it takes a copy, okay. So this is the virtual DOM. So now here the topmost part here, right? The topmost part in the case of React is your app component now, okay. So in index.js, what you have done is you just did some configurations. What is the configuration? In your document.get element by id this particular root, so it is a div here, right? So inside that particular div, you need to render your React application. Okay, so React DOM. So here is what your real this is until this is a real DOM. See here now, document.get element by id of root here, right? So this is your real DOM. So index.html div id root here, this is your real DOM. Okay, so you are mounting your virtual DOM, nothing but your React DOM or your React application into your real DOM here. Okay, so that is the configuration here. So React DOM dot render. What is the first component that you are going to render? Something called app component. Okay, so you are mounting your app component into your real DOM called document.get element by id of root. Okay, something like here. Okay, so those configurations are done in your index.js. Okay, so from now on, we will not be doing any changes here. So this is kind of a documentation. Okay, so here you have done your configurations here. Okay, so from now on, your app component will act as the first component in your React application. Okay, so inside your app component, now what do you have? So inside your app component, you have a button. So consider this is a button here. And what are another component that you have? Something called counter component. Okay, so inside your app component, you have something called button and app component, or this is a button, or this is an app component. Okay, I mean counter component. Okay, so inside counter component, what do we have? So you have paragraph tag and buttons and other things. Okay, so inside your app component, paragraph tag, button, you can have multiple buttons. You can have multiple buttons here. Okay, so now this is the thing. Okay, so that's how we need to understand here. Okay, so consider these things as component based. Okay, so this is app component, this is counter component. Inside you might have different components. So this is a starting stage, right? So you might have only 2 to 3 components. So app component and counter component. Okay, so inside your app component, you have your counter component. Okay, so that's how it works here. App component, inside that you have counter component, and your counter component may have some other components as well. Okay, so you can have multiple things. So whenever you want to modify that particular component, only that particular component will be patched. Okay, other component will not be affected at all. Okay, so that's the power of your React and the virtual DOM. Okay, so that's the difference between your index.js and app.js. Exactly. So all your future components will be added to the app component. Exactly. So index.js, always you can have it something like this. Okay, just create a new component and do configurations like mounting your virtual DOM to your real DOM. Those part are done today. I mean done here. Okay, so from now on, you need to always modify your app component. Okay, So add a new component here. For example, here you have added counter component. Okay. Inside the counter component, you can include your counter class, your counter functional, everything here. So now from now on, you are going to decide where you need to place your components. Okay. So that's the thing. That's the difference between your app component and index.js. Okay. Clear? So in our task yesterday, we can directly render counter component index.js file, y app.js file. So that's what I mentioned you so far. Okay. So you can have some root component here. Okay. And have one. So this is a practice. Okay. Always have a root component, something called app component. This is the same file. Whenever you do create React app, there will be a file called app.js. Okay. That particular file will be created on inside your index.js. So that is the way, that is the coding standard that has been given by your React. Okay. So we need to follow the same. So that's why I used in that way. Okay. So always create a root component called app component. You can have any name. I have it in the app component as a name called app component. You can have any name. Only thing is inside your index.js, you need to mount that particular component here. Okay. So that's the thing. So now from now on, you can have app component. You can have multiple components inside this component, or you can have counter component here, and inside counter component, you can have multiple components. So everything is decided by you as a developer. Okay. So that's not an issue at all. So basic thing is you need to attain your reusability. So once you create a particular component, that particular component should be used in multiple places. Okay. So that's how you need to create components. When you start creating component, it will be easy for you to understand. Please don't confuse yourself. Okay. So we are just in the initial phase. Okay. We are in the fundamentals. So we will see multiple examples in our upcoming sessions. Okay. So is it clear? So yeah, what is the difference between website and web app? So both are same. So website or web app both are same. So there is no different name for the both of the things. So website and web app both are same. That's not an issue. So web app is nothing but a short form of web application. Okay. So website, web application, web app, everything is same. Okay. So that's not a big deal. Yeah. So any other questions? So I could get some questions in private. So here today, okay. So your class will be very short, okay, because I have just completed the fundamentals, okay. So you need to know, you need to be clear from this point of time, okay. So if you want to ask any questions, you can use this as a Q&A, okay. So consider this as a question and answer session. You can ask any questions that are specific to React. I can clear it now, okay. So from tomorrow onwards, we will see. We will move to some other things like creating forms and creating submitting them to the server and how to do that and other things we will see. And also we'll be making some API calls to the server and display the data in the UI and other things. Okay, but you need to know this. These are some fundamentals. Without knowing them, it's very tough to proceed. Okay, so because someone yesterday I could get some comments from 2 to 3 people that it's going fast. Okay, so I just reduced my syllabus today. Okay, I just want to be strong in the fundamentals first, and then only you will be understanding other concepts. Okay, so if you have any questions, you can ask me now. If not, we can wind up the session. Okay. So may I know the span of complete course when it will be ended? It's not like I'm not sure about the time frame. Okay. So basic thing I know here is For React, I would take around 10 days. Then I will do a recap of all the React in that particular 10 days itself. It's not like 10 days, it's like 10 sessions. Okay. So then in the case of Node, I would take like 6 days. Then before Node, I will take a class on databases. So yes, it would take like 2 sessions. Okay. So basically React 10, database 2, Node.js, it would be like 6 to 7 or 8. I'm not sure about that. Okay. So this would be the time frame. So based on this, you can understand you can calculate the time span. Okay. So after these web things are done, so we will spend some time on AWS and other things. Okay. So based on your syllabus. So now when we run npx second time, will it fetch packages from local root folder or from the internet? Uh, I'm not sure about that. But the thing here is what I understood is whenever you use npx, okay, it will copy the file, it will copy the things from the npm repository and put it in your local folder, okay, and then the command that you want to do, okay. So, and after that is done, it will be deleted. So that's what I understand, okay. So then whenever you do npx again the code will be fetched from the repository from the cloud, okay. Those actions should be done. So that's what npx works. So that's how I understood. So maybe I may be wrong. I will confirm once tomorrow. Okay. So I'll just try out and show you. Okay. So basic thing is when I know one thing. So whenever you use npx, your folder will be fetched from internet. That's what I understand. Okay. So let's see. I will just let you know tomorrow. Okay. Yeah. So today's task would be is I'm not going to share you this particular file. Okay. So implement the same app I mentioned you, right? So on click this dot increment and decrement other things. Okay. Just implement all your life cycle methods. Okay. So not only like I mentioned you, right? So life cycle methods. Okay. Try out these things. Okay. A basic thing. Just console it here. Okay. So come to this document here. Okay. Come to this document. See the mounting phase. Just write your constructor, render, and other methods here. Okay. As I did today. Okay. So there is not like there is specific task your life cycle methods. Okay. So you just need to know the hierarchy of how your life cycle methods are being called. Okay. So only the hierarchy you need to know. Okay. So for hierarchy, you can just mention all your functions. Okay. Inside that you can have a console. Okay. And have them seen in your console here, like, okay, constructor is called and then the render function is called and the component mount is called. Okay. So you need to understand in that way alone. Okay. Same way for your updating and same way for your unmounting. Okay. So try out this same task. Okay. So I'm not going to share you the code now. Okay. So today, because you need to know how it works. Okay. So the task is create the same thing in your index.js. You need to have your app component loaded here inside your app component. Okay. So inside your app component, have a state called show, and it should have some function here, something called, it should have something called true here. Okay. So then you need to have a function called set show, and inside that you just use set state here. Okay. So if it is true, modify it to false. If it is false, modify it to true. Okay. And based on conditional rendering, so if this is a normal ternary operator. Okay. So whenever you want to add some condition inside your JSX or your return statement, you need to use curly braces here. Okay. So this dot state.show is true, render counter else empty. Okay. So then in your counter, have these buttons I mentioned you already: increment, decrement, and reset. Then your force update section here, display the same task. Yesterday, if you have tried the yesterday's task, so my all tasks that I give you daily, okay, it will be a continuation of your first day. Okay. So what is the task that I gave you yesterday? So something called increment and decrement here, right? The same task should be extended. So now you need to have your lifecycle methods placed here. Just add one more button called force update and try having false here. Okay. False and true and other things. So try false here basically. False, and then try out force update and it should update your state. Okay. Update your UI when you click on force update. Okay. Just try see the hierarchy alone. Okay, so I'm not going to share you this. Okay, please try out yourself. So yeah. Okay, so if you guys don't have any doubts, we can wind up the session. And here the task could be like trying out the life cycle method hierarchy. Okay, so other than that, everything is same. So here I will share you these things. Okay, and your feedback form would be here. So I already have the feedback form. Can you start the chat back in first class? You already sent, but I can't take it down the connection one more time. So what is the React documentation? Oh, you mean the PPT? Okay, let me share it. So my network is very slow. Yeah, I have shared you the file. Yeah, thank you guys. Please fill out the feedback form, and if you have anything, please fill in the feedback. I will try to resolve them. Okay. Yeah. Thank you guys. See you tomorrow, and have a great rest of the day. Bye bye.